Hey guys, welcome back to the Moto Buff YouTube channel. I'm Buff. This is part 2 of our suspension setup series, where today we're going to be actually taking some measurements and making some adjustments on my motorcycle. So this might be a little bit of a long one, so grab some popcorn, sit down, grab a blanket if it's cold where you're at, and enjoy. So the first step of any motorcycle suspension setup is to figure out what the sag is on the motorcycle, and then we're going to adjust from there. And then the next step will be to adjust the compression and then the rebound. So first what we're going to do is hook up our machine, and that way we can take a measurement on what the free sag is, as well as with the rider sag. If you didn't happen to catch part 1 of this video, please make sure that you go back and do that. All of these settings that we're about to make, changes and all that stuff, it's all based on a theory, and that theory is explained in part 1 of this series. So the first thing that I'm going to do is hook up this Slacker Motool to the bike. And to do that, it's magnetic, it's very easy. It just sticks. You just put that on your axle nut, and then you want to tilt it to where it's level with the axis of the forks. If we don't do that first, what's going to happen is you have it mounted over here or something like that, or over here. It's not going to work because it's going to be skewed. It has to be at on the same axis as the front fork. So now once we have this thing level and in line with the axis of the fork, we have to find a place to mount this. Now, thing about mounting, you can mount it almost anywhere you want, except I do not recommend you mounting it to the plastics of the bike in any way. Because what's going to happen is if I can pull up on this, and this actually has a little bit of movement, and if I connect to this, I might get an extra millimeter or 2 reading on the scale that isn't really there. It's just whatever play you have in the plastic. So I'd recommend hooking it up to something a little bit more stable that's not going to move when you move the bike up and down. Okay, so what I just did, I don't really have a good spot right here, so I've got a zip tie that I put loosely around the handlebar, and I'm going to connect to that. And just like that, there it is. Got that connected there. That's not really moving anywhere. Should stay pretty good. All right, so the unit that I have, it has a remote display unit, and all I did was just wrap the Velcro around the middle of the handlebar, connect that cable down to the unit, and now we are ready to make our first measurement. So for the first measurement, what we're going to do is put this thing in a mode to where it actually measures the free sag of the motorcycle. So to do that, we press and hold here, and you're going to see these lines. It's telling me, it wants me to lift up on the suspension, and what I'm going to do is lift it up until the suspension tops out, and then let it sag under its own weight, and then it's going to give us our readout. And it just zeroed out because we didn't do it in time, but I'm going to do it on the tripod just to show you guys. Okay, so let's actually take the measurement. So I'm going to reset it here. It's going to go up, up, up. So what I'm going to do is pull up gently, and then I'm going to let it back down nice and easy. Looks like about 11 millimeters. So let's do this again. I want to do this about 3 times, and I'll tell you why here in just a minute. All the way up, all the way down. 10 millimeters. All the way up, all the way down. I'm at 8 millimeters. So by measuring it 3 times, what we've done is we have accounted for any stiction that might be in the front forks. And we're going to talk about that here in just a second. Now, another thing I want to talk about as well is the concept of stiction. What is stiction? Well, stiction is when you have a little bit of friction in the fork seal or in this dust cover, or maybe your fork is slightly bent or whatever. But when you compress the suspension down, it doesn't return back to the same spot every time. I was reading Racetech's motorcycle suspension Bible, and it says that a little bit of variation is fine, and that's normal. A properly lubricated and working suspension should have 5 or 10 millimeters of stiction. Now, if you're compressing your fork and it only comes up to a certain amount, and then you compress it again, and it changes and it's down here now, and then you do it again and it's way up here, you've got too much stiction in the suspension, and it's almost impossible to get an accurate measurement on preload. So what can we do about stiction? If you are finding you have variations in your measurements all the time, and you want to get rid of some of the stiction in the suspension, one thing you can do is take this dust cover and pull it down. It won't be damaging the fork in any way if you do that, but what you'll do is you'll just pull this down. I'm going to link to a Dave Moss video that shows you exactly how to do this safely. This is just a dust cover right here. The actual fork seal is up in here. So by removing this dust cover, you have access to the fork seal. And then what you're going to do is take a very, very small amount of synthetic grease and just wipe it around the circumference of the fork. And then you wipe up any excess, because you don't want grease on your suspension, because what's going to happen is it'll pick up dirt and dust, and then eventually that can wear out your fork seal. So you want a very, very small amount. So you take this dust cover down, you put a little bit of grease around it, wipe up the excess, and stick the dust cover back up and push it back up into place. And what that'll do is it'll eliminate a lot of the stiction. Now, I did this on my RSV4 when I had it, and I found that I had about 10 to 15 millimeters of variations in my measurements at any given point. So I actually did that, and then I got it down to where it was only 2 or 3 millimeters different every time, and that solved my problem. So check the link in the description. I'll link to that Dave Moss video, and he'll show you how to do that if you want further information. You're also going to have to do that on the other fork as well to make sure that it's even. Okay, so now that we've got our free sag measurement, what we need to do is actually hop on the bike. And for that, I'm going to need my helmet. And we're going to hop on the bike without touching the unit. It still says 10 right here. And that's what the last measurement was. So, set that there, and then I'm going to hop on the bike. This Harbor Freight thing is sketch, bro. Alright. So now that we're sitting on the bike, we want to sit in just a normal riding position, and what we want to do is, I'm going to pull the front brake a little bit. I'm going to move the suspension up and down just a couple of times and see if I land in the same spot. So, done that. It's showing 22 millimeters. Now it's showing 24 millimeters. And now it's showing 21 millimeters. So I'm getting, on an average, about 22 to 23 millimeters of rider sag. Ideally, what you want for aggressive street or track day use is about 25 to 30 millimeters. On the street, we want about 30 to 35 millimeters. That's going to give you a softer, more compliant ride. Okay, for those of you who don't have the fancy Modal Slacker digital chain reader 2000, you can do this without it. And it's not that complicated. It's basically the same process. You're just going to need an assistant. Now, I don't have an assistant today, so I can't demonstrate it fully. But I can walk you through the steps that you'll take, and this is how you do it. So all you really need is a ruler or a tape measure that reads in millimeters. And like I said in my first video, if you watched, if you don't have one that reads in millimeters, you can do the conversion after you take the measurements. So you can actually use Google for this. Google's a great tool for this. You can just type it in, 1 5/8 or 2 5/8 inches, how many millimeters, and it'll come up with it. And you may even be able to ask Siri, I don't know. or Alexa, or whoever you subscribe to. So the first step, what you'll have is you'll have your assistant push up on the bike and until the suspension tops out. Once the suspension tops out, you just you take a measurement, and you take that measurement, record what it is, make sure you write it down, and then after you write it down, your assistant will gradually let go of the bike and let it sag down under its own weight. And then you'll take your other measurement. You'll take your second measurement. And what you'll do is you'll subtract the two, and that will be your free sag. Just like before, we do it 3 times just to account for any stiction. If you do have excess stiction, all you have to do is do the procedure like I talked about at the beginning of this video, and that'll take care of it. And then redo it. Make sure that you are falling within 4 or 5 millimeters each time. And then what you'll do is go and sit on the bike with all of your gear on. You'll have your assistant take a measurement right here again, and make sure you move the bike up and down a few times and make sure it's averaged out, and then take a measurement, push it up and down, take a measurement, push it up and down, take a measurement. Make sure you're writing all of this stuff down so you don't forget, and then you average them all out, and then you'll figure out what your total sag is. Easy as that. Alright, so now I'm at the rear of the bike. I'm going to do the same thing that I did with the front. What I'm going to do is put it in the top out, free sagging on it. I'm going to pull up on the suspension until it tops out, and then let it back down. We're at 9 millimeters. I'm going to record that. Then I lift up again. Let it come back down. I'm at 9 millimeters. I'm going to lift it up and bring it back down again. I'm at 9 millimeters. So we've got no stiction on the rear fork, the rear shock, and the free sag number is pretty good. You want on average 8 to 10 millimeters. So we're right there, and we're good to go. So now all that's left is to hop on the bike and see what the actual sag is with me on it. Okay, so now I'm at the rear of the bike and I'm going to hop on, and we're going to find out what our rider sag is. This sketch ass chop. Alright, so what I'm going to do is just bounce on it a couple of times to see where we're at. It's showing 37 millimeters. I'm going to jot that down. I'm going to jump on it again. Now I'm at 36 millimeters. I'm going to jump on it again. And now I'm at 37 millimeters. So I'm going to write those 3 numbers down and then average them out, and that will be our rear sag. So if I'm at 36 to 37 average, and I need to get between 30 and 35, that means I'm going to have to add just a little bit more preload to the rear shock in order to get me within the range. Alright, so it's important to note here, before we actually make any measurements, we want to be able to return back to where the suspension is right now in case we don't like the results that we got, and we'll know where to start from. So we have to figure out how much preload that we have in this rear shock first. If you have a shock with a rear collar, with the collar style, you may not want to do this. Maybe just take a picture and count the number of threads from the top. But on mine, I have this hydraulic adjuster, so this is actually very easy. So what we want to do is back the preload off all the way. And what we're going to do is count the number of turns. And then what I'm going to do is write that number down. That way, if I get out on the bike and I didn't like the change that I made, all I got to do is move it all the way out and then put it back in the same number of turns that we started with, and then the suspension will be right back to where it was before we made any adjustments. So without further ado, here we go. I'm going to hook up my tool here, and I'm going to mark where this is. Okay, so I'm going to go all the way out with it. So I'm going to go half, 1, half, 2, half, half, 4, half, and that's about it. So 4.5 turns from all the way out is what this bike came with from the factory for preload. So now that I know that it's 4.5 turns, I'm going to set it back where it was. So we're going to go half, 1, half, 2, half, 3, half, 4, 4.5. And one cool thing to note here is while I was doing this, I could watch my rear preload. It was changing, or the rear sag actually. Even though I didn't top it out, I saw it went all the way as low as 13 millimeters, and now it's sitting at 12 or so. So the suspension's not exactly where it was. If I move that, yeah, it's back at 10. So this is a good demonstration of rear preload or front preload in general, that it really just changes the ride height of the motorcycle before you get on it. That's really all it's as simple as that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add just 1 turn of the preload and see what effect it has on the measurements. I'll have to redo the measurements obviously, but we'll do it quickly. Let's see, I'm going to add a half, and then I'm going to add another half. So that's going to be 5 turns of rear preload. 5.5 rather. 5.5 turns of rear preload. And now I'm going to redo the static measurement and then get back on the bike and find out where we are for a total measurement. Okay, so now I'm going to redo this measurement here. See what we've got. I'm not going to do it 3 times because I know I don't have any stiction this time. So we're going to go and down. That's about 8 millimeters. Now I'm going to hop on the bike. Sit down. No mouse. I'm at 35. I'm at 35 again. And I'm at 35 again. So we've got 35 millimeters now. And that's in the ballpark of 30 to 35. Now, I could go ahead and add another turn just to see where we are. But I'm not going to do that. You guys get the point. We're within the range now, and if I wanted it any tighter, I would add another one. Now, if you're riding a cruiser or you're riding non-aggressive street, 35 millimeter may be a little bit too tight. Maybe you need to loosen it up, maybe 40 millimeters. 40 millimeters would be a good non-aggressive street measurement. If you're riding a cruiser, maybe even more than that. If you're a road racer, you may want 20 to 25. It just really depends on you and your ability. Okay, so for those of you who may have missed last week's video or just didn't feel like watching it because it was boring and a little bit too informational, to do the front forks, what we're going to do is remove the connectors for the electronic suspension because we're going to be spinning this nut and we don't want to spin the electrical connector and twist up the wires. So I'm going to go ahead and release these. Very simple. I'll do the same on the other side here in a minute. We'll do that off camera though. And one thing that I would like to do, and thanks to a viewer who pointed this out actually, the anodizing on here, this gold around here is very soft. So what I've chosen to do, I'm going to use a little bit of masking tape, and I'm just going to go around here, and I'll stick this around the perimeter here. I'm going to cut it in half with a razor blade, but I'm going to do this off camera because it's kind of a pain and it takes a while. I don't want to waste your time with this stuff, so I'll be back with you in a second when I get it all taped up. Okay, just like that, through the marvel of modern technology, I've got those all taped up. They're not going to get scratched by my wrench. And now we're going to do the same thing that we did with the rear suspension. We're going to go ahead and count the number of turns. I'm going to turn it to the left because that's going to back the preload off. and we're going to see exactly where we are, and then we'll adjust it back to where it was, and then I'm going to take maybe a turn, maybe 2 turns out, and we'll just measure from there until we get ourselves in the ballpark of where we want to be. Okay, so I measured it. It is exactly 7 turns of preload on this fork. So I'm going to do the same with the other fork just to make sure that they're even. Okay, so I just did this one as well, and it's exactly 7 turns. So now the next step is to turn it back in 7 turns and see where it is. What I might do is just actually go in 6 turns because we know that it had 7 in it and we need to loosen it up a little bit. So I'm going to stop at 6. And I'm going to redo a measurement and see where it is. We may have to go back to 5 turns, but we'll see. And I'll let you guys know here in a sec. Okay, so now we are in the range. We have 15 millimeters of free sag, and we have a total sag of 31. So we are now in the ballpark. Now all that's left to do is set the compression and the rebound damping. And then that's going to be done through the screen here. First, before I turn the bike back on, do all that stuff, I'm going to make sure that I reconnect these, remove my tape, put the boots back on. That way the computer can actually adjust the suspension and I don't get any fault codes. So make sure you plug your stuff back in before you go to set your compression and rebound or start the motorcycle, because you don't want to set a fault. Okay, so now that we've got the preload all set, I've gotten out of my gear. Now it's time to set the compression and the rebound damping. So right now I've got the suspension set in manual mode, and that's just to demonstrate how you would make the changes to the compression and the rebound and set it up for you. So I'm going to be using the dashboard electronics to set my compression and rebound, but it's really the same exact thing for a manual suspension. It's just you're going to have to use probably a pocket screwdriver or possibly a regular screwdriver or a nut with a socket wrench or something like that. Whatever your adjustment is for your bike, you're going to have to do. So first what I'm going to do is I'm going to bounce the bike up and down and we'll see what happens to it. So to bounce the bike up and down, I'm going to hold the brake pedal, or lever in other words. I'm going to pull up on the motorcycle, and then I'm going to kind of push it forward at the same time. I'm going to pull up first, push it down, and kind of let the suspension bounce up and down, and we're going to see, we're going to observe what happens. So here we go. So it bounced like twice. Do it again. It bounced twice. It came up, it came down, very simple, and then it bounced a couple of times. So we know that based on that, the suspension is set up a little bit too soft, and we're going to have to tighten it up. So now I've added a lot of compression damping to this, but I've left the rebound the same. On an Öhlins fork, the compression is going to be in the front right fork, and the rebound is going to be in the front left fork. So all we've done is basically change this. We haven't changed the way that the compression or the suspension rebounds over bumps. All we've done is change how it compresses. And one of the things, the concepts that I forgot to mention in the first video, is that when the suspension compresses and it rebounds, what happens is the spring actually controls the forces up and down. The compression and rebound damping change the speed of how that spring moves. So the compression will change the speed of the wheel coming up under a compression, and then the rebound will change the way that the spring releases to bring the tire back to the pavement. I was looking over my videos and I kind of missed that concept. I was kind of vague on it, so I wanted to give you guys the right answer and explain it in a way that maybe you'd be able to understand a little bit better. So I've got, I didn't change the rebound, I added some compression damping, so now let's see how it affects the motorcycle. As you see, it doesn't go down as far. It's kind of a little bit too stiff, but it still comes over the top and settles back down. See how it comes back up and then it comes back down just a little bit. And that's what it looks like when we have compression, but we still need to add some rebound as well. Okay, so now I've reversed it. I took a little bit of rebound out of it and I added all the compression. So let's see how this affects the bike. See how it compresses forward, but it's very slow to come back up. I can push it down easy, but then it returns back really slow. So what I need to do now is add a little bit more compression, or take some rebound out and add a little bit of compression. All right, so now I've got it about right. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to go down, we wanted to resist the compression just a little bit, and we wanted to come back up to the top and just barely come over center and back down, just the slightest amount. We don't want it to bounce. So here's what we've got. Push it down, it comes back up, and it just barely settles back down. And that's right where we want it. If you get to the track and you need to make changes, you might need to make it a little bit tighter, but this will be a good setup for the street. So now that we've got this set up, now we're gonna work on the rear of the bike. Okay, so now I'm at the rear of the bike, and now what I'm gonna do is jostle the suspension and show you guys what it looks like when it's fully loosened up. I've got all the settings at their minimal settings. The valves are completely open and the suspension's barely gonna resist me at all. And it's gonna come right back up. I'm gonna put a flat hand right here to demonstrate. As I take the weight off my hand, it follows my hand right back up instantly. We want it to lag behind just a little bit, and I'll show you what that's gonna look like when it's in the sweet spot. All right, so here's what it looks like when I've set the compression, or the rebound rather. I set the rebound a little bit too slow. So what's gonna happen is I'm gonna push the suspension down and you're gonna watch how slow it comes back up. I can almost take my hand off of this and the bike will actually rise up to meet my hand a little bit slower. So check this out. See how it goes super slow, because I almost dropped my motorcycle. It comes up super slow. And what's gonna happen is if you go over a bump, it's gonna compress the rear suspension and it's not gonna allow the rear tire to come back and meet the pavement, and you're gonna lose traction over bumps. So we wanna set that a little bit faster to react. All right, so now I feel like I've got it in the sweet spot. I had to play back and forth with clicks. On a regular Öhlins shock, you're gonna have a compression adjustment and a rebound adjustment. It'll say REB or COMP as an abbreviation, and you would turn the clicker back and forth to get it into the right spot that you need. With the manual one, I've got it set here. But here's what we get. I did not set the compression yet, but I just set the rebound, and watch how it follows my hand up, but it's not almost pushing my hand up to release. See, it's just a little bit slower now. It's still coming up fast, but it's controlled. It's not just letting the tire fall all the way to the ground and it's not holding it back and then you losing traction. So this is about the sweet spot right here. I'm gonna set the compression now. It's actually, I've got it all the way loosened up. So it pushes down with almost lightning speed. So what I need to do is slow that down just a little bit. So I'm gonna set the suspension now and we'll take a look at it in a second. Okay, so now I've got the compression increased and I've got the valve almost fully closed off. Let's take a look and see how it does now. So you see, I can barely even get any suspension travel out of it because it's slowing me down so much. So now what I've got the compression set a little bit too hard. That's going to cause a really harsh ride over bumps. It's not going to allow the suspension to actually move in its travel as much. So you're going to want to have that a little bit softer on the street, and I'll show you. I'm going to show you what that looks like now. I'm going to get it in the sweet spot for you. All right, now we've got it in the sweet spot. Let's check it out. I can push the suspension down, but it's not too fast. It comes up, but it doesn't come up too fast. This is in the sweet spot, and this is going to provide you optimal traction on the road and on the racetrack as well. Okay, so now that we've got this thing set up, a very good idea is to check and see what the balance looks like. when you jostle both the front and the rear suspension at the same time. So here's what we're going to do. Put the bike back up. Make sure the handlebar is straight here. I'm going to hold on to the handlebar here. I'm going to put another hand here on the seat. And what I'm going to do is just push the bike up and down and see if they rise together. Now, if they rise together, that way we know we're balanced. If we get kind of a teeter-tottering effect, because the front is softer than the rear or vice versa, then we know we need to make some changes as well. So let's take a look and see how the bike bounces up and down and see if I got it right. Now I can't see that, and you probably won't be able to do it either unless you have a camera that you can film. If you have a camera, you can go back and look at the footage, which is what I'm going to do right now. If you have an assistant that knows how to do this, you could stand where my camera is and watch the bike move up and down. So I'm going to review the footage and see what we got. Alright, so I reviewed the footage, and after looking at it, it looks like the rear of the motorcycle pushes down first, and I don't get as much out of the front. And I see kind of like a teeter-totter effect. It's very slight, but if you go back and watch the footage, I'm going to try to do my best to slow motion this thing as best I can to show you guys. That means that the front or the rear of the bike is actually moving a little bit faster than the front of the bike, which means that the front of the bike is a little bit too tight based on what I'm looking at. So I went ahead and loosened up the front just a little bit. I took a little bit of compression and rebound damping out of it just to soften it up just a little bit. We still have a good adjustment here by pushing it back and forth. It goes down, back up, and back over just a little bit, so it doesn't look like it changed a whole lot up front, and I only did like 2 or 3 clicks to make the change anyway. But now you'll see, when I jostle the bike up and down, that it moves evenly. And it feels a lot better in my hand too. I don't have as much resistance. Before I had more resistance in this hand than I did this hand, so now they seem to be about even, and the bike moves up and down evenly as well. So now we've got it in the right spot, and now she's fully set up, good to go. One thing I want to talk about is heat and oil viscosity. So right now I'm in my garage. It's about 45 degrees outside. It's pretty chilly. I have not ridden this bike today at all, so the suspension is ice cold. So when oil gets cold, it gets thicker. And after you warm the motorcycle up and you've been driving it for a while, it's gonna thin out. So these adjustments that I just made on a cold suspension, when you get out on the real road and you start getting some heat into the suspension as it moves up and down, what's going to happen is the oil's going to thin out and the compression and the rebound are going to open up. The suspension's going to get a little bit softer because the thin oil will move through the valves much easier when the oil is warm, as opposed to when it's cold and the oil is nice and thick. So when you make these settings, it's a good idea to go and ride the motorcycle, ride it like you normally would, get the suspension nice and warm, pull it into the garage, and then immediately do the adjustments. I'm only doing these adjustments because I just wanted to demonstrate them for you. In the real world, I have automatic suspension and I keep it in dynamic mode, so it always adjusts the compression and rebound on the fly as I ride, and that's what I like to leave the suspension in. If I was a real serious track day guy or a racer, what I would do is put it in manual mode and I'd have it set up. That way it's consistent. Every single corner you're going to get the same suspension settings. For me though, I do about 90% on the street, and I just do a few track days a year. So I'm going to leave mine in automatic mode, and that's going to pretty much put it in the optimal spot as I ride. I don't need the bike to be extremely consistent from corner to corner, and I just want optimal traction. So I'm going to leave mine in automatic mode. And also another consideration is this is a baseline. This is what we call a baseline tune. I didn't get it down to the real nitty-gritty. I really don't even know how to do all the real nitty-gritty stuff like suspension geometry changes based on tire wear and things like that. A suspension expert's going to get you there. For me, and for the information in these 2 videos, this is just to get you in the ballpark, and it's a pretty big ballpark depending on how heavy you are and how you ride, your riding style, the climate that you're riding in, things like that. So take all of this stuff with a really big grain of salt. It's not going to be exact. It's not supposed to be. This is just supposed to get you in the ballpark and pretty close. So when you're out there on the racetrack or you're out there on the street, your bike is comfortable and it's going to be safe. If you're going around the racetrack and you feel like the bike's running wide, or the weight transfer is not correct, or you're getting really poor tire wear, things like that, you're going to want to go see a suspension expert to get it set up. But if you're a beginner to an intermediate track day rider, this is going to get you pretty close. And to be honest, if you're going out there on the track as a beginner and you're missing your apex by 3 feet, it's not your suspension. You know, the biggest part to riding is actually learning the correct techniques and the correct fundamentals, and not obsessing about how many clicks you have on the compression damping on your suspension. So just wanted to put that out there and plant that seed in your head. So I hope you got a lot out of this video, and hope you have a little bit better understanding of how suspensions work and how to set them up and get you in the ballpark and make your ride a little bit more comfortable and safe on the street. Thanks for watching.